Marhaba, معكم Rayyan, and this is episode 20 of the Vegans for Palestine podcast. Rimona Afana is a Romanian Palestinian researcher, lecturer, activist, and multimedia artist. Her research on war crimes, crimes against humanity, crimes against nature, and against non-human animals is published in leading law and criminology journals and books, and her artwork appears in literature journals, art magazines, festivals, and exhibitions. Over the past 20 years, Rimona has also contributed to many civic projects on human and non-human rights in different countries. In this episode, Rimona sits down with Dalal and discusses the horrific crimes perpetrated by the apartheid state against animals and nature across the Gaza Strip. Please listen and share this episode.
I'll be sharing today research I've been working on for the past 2 years on the forgotten victims of the atrocities in Gaza, animals and nature. Despite the massive impact on non-humans, these victims remain outside mainstream news and academic studies. And I write this because on my dad's side, our family is from and some still in Gaza. And because for the past 20 years, my studies, research, teaching, and activism have been on crimes against both humans and non-humans.
So nature and humans haven't been spared from the atrocities of the genocide on Gaza and the occupied Palestine. And you have researched the topic of genocide and ecocide, especially on the topic of Palestine. So let's start first by explaining to the listeners what the term ecocide means in the way that you have researched it and cited that in your work, and how does it manifest on the ground from what we see from those wartime practices we're witnessing from the Israeli occupation authorities in occupied Palestine.
So 775 days of atrocities in Gaza have not spared animals and nature. So many animals have been killed or harmed, and much of Gaza has been turned into a toxic wasteland, unable to anymore sustain life. But since compassion and accountability are lacking for the suffering of humans, there's not much left for non-humans, lower on our conventional hierarchies of victimhood. Israel's war on Gaza is both genocidal and ecocidal. We can't separate one from the other. Since crimes are intersectional, so should our solidarity be. If we care about injustice, we need to care about both the human and non-human victims of mass atrocities. But while the genocide in Gaza is now widely recognized, the ecocidal facet of this annihilation campaign remains underappreciated. I will later go in greater detail about the direct harms to sentient beings. First, I'll cover indirect harms, the broader environmental side of Israel's war on Gaza. Given the catastrophic proportions of its effects, we can safely define Israel's assault as ecocidal. Ecocide refers to severe and widespread or long-term environmental damage. Ecocide can occur with or without intent. It may not be deliberate, but it can arise out of negligence. Ecocides are typically perpetrated by states and/or corporations. Since ecocides often have transboundary effects, they also need to be regulated at an international level. Since the 1970s, scholars and activists have advocated for the international criminalization of ecocide. Some see it as the missing fifth crime against peace, alongside genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. However, today, ecocide is still not an international crime. It's not under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. In recent years, some countries have introduced laws punishing severe widespread environmental harm comparable to the concept of ecocide. However, for the most part, ecocides have remained unpunished. And this is unsurprising, since even the crime of all crimes, genocide, is narrowly defined and continues to be perpetrated with impunity in Palestine and elsewhere. So how does ecocide manifest in Gaza? I will cover some main areas. The massive toxicity from explosives and destroyed infrastructure, severe damage to plants and soil, water pollution and water scarcity, greenhouse gas emissions from war, pre-war, post-war activities, and the lasting ties between mass atrocity and epigenetics. First, the chemical dimension. Massive amounts of hazardous substances have contaminated the entire Gaza Strip, harming humans and non-humans for generations. By July this year, Israel had dropped on Gaza over 125,000 tons of explosives, destruction unprecedented since World War II. Hundreds of thousands of homes, schools, hospitals, media offices, factories, mosques have been turned to rubble. According to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, 92% of housing units, 88% of businesses and factories, and 77% of roads in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed. The extent of destruction is catastrophic. With a war now in its 25th month, the amount of explosives used is immense, which has not only caused massive killings, injuries, maiming, destruction, and displacement, but it will be harming humans, animals, plants, and microorganisms for decades to come. Explosive munitions can contain lead, antimony, uranium, DNT, TNT, RDX, HMX, and other substances with toxic environmental effects. To this, we add radioactive, chemical, and biological waste from the production of weapons of mass destruction, Israel having nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, though not confirming nor denying this. Besides the hazardous substances in weaponry, the destruction of buildings can release asbestos, which can cause fatal conditions like asbestosis, mesothelioma, or lung cancer. Also lead, mercury, arsenic, cadmium, chromium, thallium, formaldehyde, phthalates, flame retardants, and so on. The bombing of industrial facilities comes with additional risks given the large quantities of hazardous substances stored. The millions of tons of debris leave behind noxious smoke, toxic dust, unexploded ordnance, and other hazards which pose long-term risks to humans and non-humans. As documented in many other war zones, explosives reduce entire cities to toxic waste, which contaminates the soil, air, and water. So besides the immediate direct killing and destruction from explosives, we also add the long-term and indirect harm to all living beings from contamination with hazardous substances. Next, we have water pollution and scarcity. Already by March 2024, Israel's assault had led to the collapse of the wastewater treatment and waste disposal infrastructure and to a freshwater crisis due to the contamination of groundwater and the destruction of desalination facilities, as documented by the United Nations Environment Program. Massive amounts of sewage and trash have contaminated the entire Gaza Strip, spreading pathogens and hazardous chemicals on the ground and in the sea, combined with a severe shortage of clean water, all impacting both people and animals. In September, 96% of households in Gaza were water insecure, and in October, 49% of Gazans had access to less than the minimum emergency standard of 6 liters per day for drinking and cooking, as noted by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Long before this genocidal war, Gaza was experiencing a water crisis. In 2018, 97% of Gaza's groundwater was unfit for human consumption. Palestinians in both Gaza and the West Bank have been experiencing a water crisis for decades because of Israeli colonialism, occupation, annexation, and apartheid. Israel controls water sources, denying or limiting Palestinians access to water and damaging Palestinian water infrastructure. For instance, as documented by B'Tselem in 2023, while Israelis used an average of 247 liters of water per day, Palestinians in the West Bank only had access to 82 liters per day. And in Palestinian communities not connected to the water grid, the average daily water consumption was only 26 liters per person, so nearly 10 times less than the Israelis. Next, I cover the damage to plants and soil. The toxic substances released by weapons and ruin infrastructure also harm plants and microorganisms in the soil, which are vital for agriculture. By early spring 2024, half of tree cover and farmland in Gaza had been destroyed by bombardment and bulldozing. Drawing on satellite imagery, a study by Ian and colleagues shows that by September 2024, over 90% of tree crop fields in Gaza City were lost and 73% in North Gaza, with variable losses in other areas, all of course considerably worse now. Other trees were cut by people to use for heating and cooking, given the severe shortage of gas and electricity. The destruction of trees affects the air quality as well as wildlife, particularly birds who've lost their homes. The Gaza Strip had around 250 species of birds, all now affected by the ecocidal operations. By September, 87% of croplands in Gaza, 87% of agricultural wells, and nearly 80% of greenhouses had been damaged. Now, only 4% of cropland is available for cultivation, according to latest UN estimates. To confront the ongoing famine, Gazans have been trying to grow vegetables, but much of the soil has become unsuitable for agriculture because of the heavy contamination. The soil in Gaza was already poisoned from prior wars, as well as from Israel's repeated aerial spraying of chemicals like glyphosate, oxyfluorophane, and DCMU or Duron, which are all known or probable human carcinogens with a wide range of toxic effects on non-human animals. Also, this has damaged farmlands, impacting plants, animals, humans, and microorganisms. Like defoliants used in Vietnam, this is a form of herbicidal warfare as determined in a report by Forensic Architecture in 2019. Gaza has been turned into a toxic wasteland, affecting people, animals, and nature for generations to come. And the context also matters for understanding the ties between genocide and ecocide in Gaza, because environmental harm is embedded in the fabric of Israel's colonial project, with myriad practices harming nature. For instance, trees specifically have been for decades victims of Israel's colonialism, occupation, annexation, and war. From 1967 until 2010, Israel had uprooted 2.5 million trees, destruction serving Israeli settlements and the separation wall. To this, we add over 100,000 olive trees uprooted, burned, or chemically poisoned by Israeli settlers only from 2010 to 2020. The practice continues to this day. Destroying olive trees, a symbol of Palestinian belonging to the land and of resilience, has been systematic, resulting in millions of dollars of lost income yearly for Palestinian families. Next, my research documents harms from greenhouse gas emissions. So besides killing non-humans, the production, transport, use, and disposal of weaponry also causes pollution to the air, water, and land, harming entire ecosystems. Militaries are among the largest consumers of fuel globally. In 2022, the total military carbon footprint was 5.5% of global emissions, and armies produce more greenhouse gases than the total emissions of most countries. A study by Nymark and colleagues shows that the projected carbon dioxide emissions in Gaza from war, pre-war, and post-war activities surpasses the individual annual emissions of over 102 countries. That's an immense carbon footprint. The effects of environmental destruction from air, water, soil pollution to the killing of plants and animals, and so shortages of food are of course even worse felt in densely populated areas. Even before this war, Gaza was one of the most densely populated places on Earth. 365 square kilometers and 2.1 million inhabitants, squeezed by the military operations in 15% of the land. By July this year, each person was inhabiting under 24 square meters. That's the size of a Guantanamo prison cell. Gazans, of course, have no way out and no prospects of going back to the rest of the Gaza Strip, given estimations that it will take decades to clean up the rubble and to rebuild. UN reports show that it may take 80 years to rebuild Gaza. Only removing the over 50 million tons of debris could take up to 20 years. Another UN report notes that once a ceasefire is reached, it would take Gaza 350 years just to restore its GDP to its level of 2022. So the destruction of the natural and built environment breaks human and non-human lives for generations. And the next section of my research looks precisely at that, mass atrocity and epigenetics. Gaza has been turned into a toxic wasteland, affecting humans and non-humans for generations. Those here and now, broken physically and psychologically, are not the only victims. Future generations will face the many long-term consequences of this genocidal, ecocidal war. The crimes detailed so far are likely to cause epigenetic changes in humans and non-humans, all shook by the massive trauma and toxicity. Hundreds of studies have documented epigenetic alterations in individuals exposed to chronic stressors, such as psychological trauma, exposure to toxic substances, impoverished diets, infections, extreme heat or cold, and other factors. Also, the inter and transgenerational transmission of some of these epigenetic changes. The long-lasting psychological and physical effects of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity have been covered in the vast literature on intergenerational trauma, and many epigenetic changes caused by chronic stressors have been documented in non-human animals. But the intergenerational impact of mass atrocity on animals, plants, and ecosystems is not well understood, and that's an area scientists will hopefully explore over the next years. Given the colossal scale of suffering, destruction, and toxicity, all beings in Gaza might develop epigenetic changes in response to the harm experienced, and these alterations will shape and misshape life for decades. So, to sum up the areas covered so far, genocide is tied to ecocide for Palestinians, not only in Gaza now, but historically in all of Palestine, since Israel's colonialism, occupation, annexation, apartheid, and genocidal wars have been tied to many forms of environmental harm over the past decades. Also, this is not unique to Palestine. In other colonial enterprises on different continents, the genocide of indigenous people has been implemented in tandem with ecocide. Extractivism and environmental destruction are common features of colonialism. The catastrophic destruction of the natural and built environment in Gaza harms humans and non-humans now and intergenerationally.
Indeed, the environmental devastation that we have been witnessing and seeing happening in our time and across the decades is both a tool of the violence and a lingering legacy of it. And it's affecting the humans and non-humans across generations, from the degrading of health, the food systems, the habitats of the humans and the non-humans alike. So what crimes have we been witnessing against non-human animals specifically in this context, Rimona?
Yes, let's look at the direct crimes and harms against non-human animals specifically. Animals in Gaza have been suffering for now 775 days from this genocidal, ecocidal assault. Amid war, animals, particularly those with complex sentience, blown to pieces, left to die in agony under the rubble, dying slowly from starvation, dehydration, from untreated injuries, infections, or chronic illnesses, are not unlike us. They also suffer physically and psychologically from fear, pain, hunger, thirst, cold, or heat. Their suffering is no less of a crime, unfortunately mostly non-criminalized, than the atrocities inflicted on humans. The impact on sentient beings is immense. A report by Euromed Human Rights Monitor estimates about 97% of Gaza's animals have been killed by bombing, starved to death, or looted by July. Hundreds of thousands of animals killed, with 93% of poultry farms fully destroyed, 97% of cows, sheep, goats, and 94% of donkeys, mules, and horses killed by bombing or starvation. This confirms the findings of prior studies. The Food and Agriculture Organization documented that by spring 2024, 95% of Gaza's cattle had died, and fewer than 43% of sheep and 37% of goats were still alive. The worst affected was the poultry sector, with only 1% of birds left alive. Animals used for recreation have also suffered. Nearly all zoos in Gaza have been destroyed. Animals dying from bombardment, starvation, and lack of veterinary care. Also, by early 2024, reports by local journalists indicate 90% of horses in Gaza's equestrian clubs had been killed, while the rest went missing. If we see complete impunity when it comes to the human victims of this war, non-humans matter even less. The killing of animals is not only normalized when it becomes collateral damage amid war, but their killing is legal even when it's intentional and done during times of peace, as shown by legal yet murderous sectors like industrial animal farming and wildlife trade, which kill and torture trillions of animals annually. Many animals who survived the destruction, air, and ground operations eventually died from starvation, dehydration, and untreated illnesses and injuries. Given the severe famine deliberately inflicted by Israel, it's become routine to hear of people and animals starving to death, dogs eating murdered humans or children, and stray cats and dogs all scavenging through trash. Alongside Yemen and Sudan, Gaza experiences the world's worst starvation crisis of the past decades. The famine in Gaza was officially recognized in August by the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, the world's barometer on hunger. In early October, 100% of Gazans were facing high levels of acute food insecurity, and 96% of households experienced water insecurity, as reported by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. The famine impacts every human and animal. Also, the few animals left alive experience worsening exploitation. Given the destruction of infrastructure and of vehicles and the lack of fuel because of the blockade, Gazans have been using donkeys for transporting heavy loads on damaged roads amid severe heat or cold, with most animals malnourished, dehydrated, and overworked. Looting is another facet of the criminality here. In August, Middle East Monitor and other platforms reported that dozens to hundreds of donkeys were stolen by the Israeli military under the guise of so-called veterinary rescue. While, of course, starving and severely injured humans did not deserve rescue. Some donkeys were taken to farms or sanctuaries in Israel, others taken abroad. Palestinians claim they were looted to prevent their use as primary mode of transport amid the genocide. So, how do we estimate the impact? The statistics we have so far on animals in Gaza only include owned animals. Even in times of peace, no one keeps track of unowned animals. Unsurprising given our utilitarian rapport to non-humans. So while a precise overall toll is not available, my estimation is that if we add unowned domestic animals and wild animals to the documented owned animals killed by bombs or starved to death, the total reaches hundreds of thousands to millions of impacted animals, killed, injured, maimed, displaced, starved, or looted. I infer the extent of harm to animals also from the extent of destruction discussed earlier. For instance, in parts of Gaza, 70 to 90% of trees have been wiped out. I correlate that to the 250 species of birds in Gaza, with probably tens of thousands of individuals who now have lost their home. Similar indirect harms apply to marine animals harmed by the massive sea pollution from sewage and toxic chemicals from munitions and destroyed infrastructure. Another side of non-human suffering here is captivity. My prior research has documented the severe physical and psychological impact of captivity on animals with complex sentience, and numerous judicial, legislative, and direct action initiatives seeking to free captive animals. But while conventional sites of confinement, such as factory farms, labs, zoos, aquaria, circuses, menageries, are condemned by many, we also have atypical forms. Captivity during war is one of them. Amid mass atrocity, animals often find themselves confined, restrained, or immobilized. In Gaza, many animals were trapped under the rubble, chained or tied, confined in stalls, crates, or cages amid bombardment. Whether companion animals captive in collapsed homes or domestic animals raised for food captive in farms or wild animals captive in zoos, they found themselves unable to move, with their human caretakers dead, injured, or displaced, so no one dared to release and care for them. In Gaza, which even before the genocidal war was described as the world's largest concentration camp, everyone, human and non human, is captive. With borders closed for nearly 2 decades and relentless bombing, there's no escape. Captivity amid war means a slow and painful death. Next, my research covers the sinister decoupling of human from non human rights. For many Israelis, human rights seem disconnected from non human rights. It's not only Israeli human rights valued over Palestinian rights, but we also often see animal rights valued over and clouding human rights. Israel portrays itself as one of the world's vegan capitals with a growing animal rights movement. This creates a veneer of ethics and compassion. Yet some of the same Israelis prizing animal rights have little empathy for Palestinian humans and non humans, blown to pieces or starved to death. As your platform, Vegans for Palestine, has shown in many social media posts and prior podcast episodes, Israel's vegan washing runs in tandem with its greenwashing, pinkwashing, and other so called progressive movements which conceal state crime. So we have here two incompatible yet interlocked processes. On the one hand, we have dehumanizing or animalizing humans. Palestinians are treated as animals. For instance, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Galant's infamous quote, "We are fighting against human animals," sentiment shared by Israeli politicians, military leaders, lawmakers, and ordinary people. But on the other hand, we have humanizing non humans, many Israelis treating their companion animals like humans, better treatment than they would ever extend to Palestinians.
Vegan washing. Vegan washing is appealing to animal rights activists by convincing them that you are morally on the same page and love and want to protect animals just as much as they do. I'm sure you've heard this before, but Israeli soldiers claim to be walking around in vegan leather boots because they say they love animals. That is, unless these animals belong to Palestinians. Israeli military, police, and settlers have all been known to slaughter Palestinian livestock en masse as a direct attempt to harm the Palestinian farming community. Another technique is called pinkwashing. Pinkwashing is when a company or organization or an entire country uses LGBTQIA struggles as a front to promote themselves as queer-friendly, when in actuality, they are harming the very population they claim to be in support of. For example, the Pride Parade in Tel Aviv is internationally known. Israel loves to call itself the only democracy in the Middle East and considers itself the only safe place for the queer community in the Middle East. Not only is Israel occupying and oppressing and killing Palestinians on a daily basis, but there are public record of them kidnapping queer Palestinians and blackmailing them into working with Israeli intelligence agencies and the military and police in order to cause further harm to the general Palestinian population. And the last one we're going to talk about today is something called greenwashing. Greenwashing is when you market yourself as environmentally friendly while simultaneously destroying the environment. And nothing says you love the environment more like dropping bombs on a million children. Aside from things like burning thousands of year old olive trees and spraying harmful pesticides on Palestinian crops and ripping up indigenous Palestinian plants to replace them with invasive ones and draining the Dead Sea, the weapons of absolute mass destruction that Israel has used against Palestinians, especially Palestinians living in Gaza, have contaminated everything from waterways to the air. It's so important that you're aware of these techniques that Israel uses so that you can help us dispel harmful information if these topics ever come up.
Indeed, we have been witnessing how animals have been killed by the same forces that are also killing the humans in occupied Palestine, and how explosions and buildings collapses and airstrikes and many other ways that Israeli occupation forces have been using to kill life in Gaza has also been killing animals in Gaza. So I want to ask you, how is Israel's genocide weaponizing animals, or how is Israel weaponizing animals indeed? Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, so one sinister form of animal abuse I cover in my research, which you and many other Palestinians are very well aware of, is the weaponization of animals. Animals become complicit against their will in war crimes and crimes against humanity. In June last year, Euromed Human Rights Monitor reported that Israel is using military dogs to torture, injure, and even rape Palestinians, with multiple cases of dogs mauling Gazans, including women, children, and elderly. For decades, Israel has used military dogs to brutalize Palestinians in prisons or during home invasions. An investigation by the Center for Research on Multinational Corporations shows some of the dogs used for crimes in Gaza are imported from the Netherlands, from companies which have supplied the Israeli military for decades. Last autumn, this organization and 9 other Palestinian and Dutch NGOs sued the Dutch state over its role in facilitating Israel's violations of international law, and one of the demands in the case was halting exports of military dogs. The weaponization of animals is not unique to Palestine. For millennia, animals have been involved in wars, used as means of transport, of communication, espionage, reconnaissance, directly engaged in combat, or used in weapons research. Though animals can become aggressors, ultimately they are victims due to their lack of consent. The weaponization of animals amid genocide is just another form of animal cruelty.
So we're witnessing this continuous military quote unquote operation, which is indeed the genocide. And we see how they're really destroying life in Gaza. Where is the international law? If there is international law, what does it actually say? And what are, the international law people saying about all that's happening in Gaza and in occupied Palestine?
Gaza is the graveyard of international law, as noted by Raji Surani, director of the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, the leading human rights NGO in Gaza. My research over the past 2 years on the crimes in Gaza and over the past 20 years on the situation in Palestine broadly shows that what's unique about the atrocities in Gaza are two aspects. First, the catastrophic proportion of their effects, both currently and intergenerationally. Second, they come in a context of exceptional prior criminality and impunity, spanning nearly 1 century. We have Israel's settler extractive colonialism, the world's last active colonial project. We have the longest illegal military occupation in modern times. We have annexation, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, routine war crimes, crimes against humanity, and human rights violations. We have a decades-long US and European complicity, corporate profiteering, and now we add genocide and ecocide. These are widely documented realities breaking the lives of millions in Palestine, humans and non-humans. Israel's ongoing genocidal and ecocidal assault on Gaza is among the worst contemporary atrocities, a live-streamed war of annihilation which has fractured the lives of millions of beings. Gaza shows us that the law has failed to prevent, halt, and repair mass atrocity. Despite the unprecedented Palestine Solidarity global movement, Israel's genocidal ecocidal operations have continued unabated. Foreign governments continue aiding and abetting genocide. International peacekeeping and accountability bodies remain in paralysis, and corporations continue profiting. Complicity is what has allowed for decades Israel's criminality. This point in history is no different. The genocide in Gaza is part of a system of global complicity, as noted in the latest report of UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine, Francesca Albanese. Though the legal nuances of these crimes against humans and non-humans may seem relevant, I believe that a legal commentary is actually redundant. For decades, Israel has casually violated with impunity international human rights law, humanitarian law, criminal law, and the modest norms in environmental law and animal rights law do not add much. The laws we have are narrow, shallow, antiquated, out of touch with the realities of contemporary warfare, and on top of all that, they're unenforced. International humanitarian law provides minimal protections for animals amid war. Also, as mentioned earlier, ecocide is not yet an international crime under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. But although impunity remains the norm for the many state and corporate crimes against humans and non-humans, this is disrupted by civic non-binding initiatives such as popular tribunals, following the tradition of the 1966 Russell Tribunal on U.S. crimes in Vietnam. Over the past decade, several sessions of the Russell Tribunal on Palestine have been convened. We've also had the Merchants of Death War Crimes Tribunal, multiple rights of nature tribunals, and recently the Gaza Tribunal. Since integrity and compassion are often lacking in the political, legislative, and judicial communities able to make a difference, civil society is left trying to compensate for the apathy and complicity of those in power. The lack of criminal accountability and the outsourcing of financial responsibility have become core features of state and corporate criminality in Palestine and elsewhere. For decades, Israel has massacred, injured, maimed, tortured, displaced humans and animals, and it has destroyed, sometimes irreversibly, the natural and built environment. Yet, it's never the criminals paying for the damage. Billions in aid to Gaza for food, healthcare, rebuilding homes and infrastructure come from a few governments and from many simple people who never contributed to the atrocities. We all have a duty to not stay numb, even if our efforts feel like a band-aid. But while solidarity matters, it cannot compensate for the lack of criminal and financial accountability that perpetrators enjoy. Given the scale and severity of crimes against humans and non-humans globally and their deep-rooted tie to profit, criminalization is imperative. Otherwise, diplomacy and civil solidarity only offer symptomatic relief. In a way, it's like a temporary painkiller while the underlying illness progresses.
So, knowing what we know now, with all of this work on explaining the connection between the genocide and ecocide in the colonial context of what the Israeli occupation authority is conducting in Palestine, and the role of the international complicity in enabling the crimes of Israeli occupation in Palestine, what is it that we can really do? How do we move to change things up?
I'm not really sure what we can do because, for the most part, I'm fairly pessimistic about what has been done and what can be done. But I urge everyone to continue raising awareness about the atrocities. The genocide and ecocide in Gaza are ongoing. Israel has repeatedly violated the latest ceasefire, and no substantive relief has entered Gaza. The situation for both humans and non-humans remains catastrophic. So we cannot treat this as a closed chapter in history. The crimes are ongoing. So talk about Gaza with family, with friends, with colleagues, post on social media, donate to Sulala Animal Rescue, Gaza Soup Kitchen, Samir Project, and other grassroots projects in Gaza. Go to protests, sign petitions, and also something I've been talking about again and again for the past 2 years. We need to confront the silence on Gaza of many human rights and animal rights NGOs. Neutrality amid mass atrocity is complicity, and so many, including scholars and activists who've built careers of supposedly fighting injustice, Colleagues and friends I once respected have chosen silence. Nearly all major animal rights organizations have remained silent on Gaza. Crimes are intersectional, and so should our solidarity be. We cannot credibly be single issue social justice warriors, closing our eyes to mass atrocity against people while supposedly being progressive about animal rights. And the other way around. Human rights experts lecturing on ethics and legalities with animal corpses on their plates. Sadly, the conscience of many pauses when it comes to Palestine. We need to keep exposing and confronting them. The atrocities continue because so many in positions of power have chosen apathy or complicity.
I want to ask you something that I normally would ask at the very beginning of the podcast, that is about veganism. And clearly, veganism plays a major role in different ways that we are advocating for Palestine and trying to bring people to understand why it is vegan to call for the end of the genocide and ecocide and stand up for the humans and non-humans. But in your case, can you tell me how veganism intersects with your research and your activism and all the work that you do, both personally and professionally?
So, my journey to veganism has been gradual, and initially it wasn't about animal rights. I stopped eating eggs 23 years ago after an incident in my grandparents' village. I found an almost fully formed chick inside an egg I picked from under our hens to make scrambled eggs. And after that incident, I developed a deep aversion for eggs and I stopped eating eggs. I stopped eating meat in 2014 out of respect for my partner back then, who was and is vegan. Then I was pretty clueless on the severity of animal rights and environmental issues associated to carnism and to industrial animal farming. So initially, I just did it out of respect for him and respect for our shared life and for my own health. Um, I've dealt and deal with many chronic health problems and complications or disabilities after several sports accidents. Um, and 10 years ago, I mostly eliminated dairy. Since 2014, I haven't eaten or touched meat. And even when I was eating meat before that, I couldn't touch or prep it myself. I only ate it if someone else cooked it. When traveling, because I sometimes lack access to cooking facilities, and because in many countries there are no or few vegan alternatives in stores, and most people don't understand veganism to offer you something fully plant-based, it's hard to stay completely vegan. But as a proportion of what I've eaten over the past 10 years, about 95% has been plant-based. I see many practical and ethical dilemmas around veganism, which I've shared with your colleague Ryan, and which maybe we'll discuss in greater detail in a future episode. To me, veganism is about nonviolence, broadly about reducing suffering. And it's also about creativity. Before, I rarely cooked, and what I did was conventional, conservative. But over the past 10 years, improvising vegan dishes has been one of the greatest joys in my life. I improvise new things every day, and it takes creativity to veganize traditional dishes you love and also to understand the nutritional aspects behind it. So, veganism has made me more health conscious, more creative, and more aware of the many forms of violence surrounding us, and also of the intersectionality of violence between humans and non humans. So, to me, vegan cooking is not that different from poem writing or collage making or painting or drawing, which I also do sometimes. Um, you select the raw materials, you pick tools and techniques, you improvise combinations, you learn and unlearn. The difference between cooking and other creative processes is that we all need food. Eating and cooking are universal. To me, it's very satisfying to engage intellectually and sensorially to veganize non-vegan dishes most of us love, using only plant-based products to replicate certain flavors and textures of animal-based dishes. It all takes experimentation. So to me, vegan cooking involves research, art, and activism. You need to learn about the plants you use. You need to get creative aesthetically as you transform supplies into meals. And you need to also think as an activist, since veganism is a broader lifestyle. It's not just about diet, it's about resisting the notion that crimes against animals are normal and necessary. So, my journey to veganism was not the awareness of animal abuse leading to veganism, but the other way around. First, I gradually gave up animal products, and as a result of this new lifestyle, I started learning more about our crimes against animals and the environment, and that translated into research and activism. My work over the past few years on crimes against non-humans has been an extension of my prior studies, research and activism on human rights abuses, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. So it was a sort of a natural extension because our compassion and our integrity cannot be partial. If we care about some beings, we need to care about others too.
يا هالعريس بلادك ما أرينا يا العريس بلادك ما أرينا يا ليتك من جبل عجل قطعنا يا ليتك من جبل عجل قطعنا وتفصلت بحلب واهتزت
Do you have a final message that you wish to share with the listeners, and particularly the vegans who are maybe hearing about Ecocide for the first time and maybe learning new things from your research about what's happening in Gaza, despite what's been circulated and pushed by the Israeli propaganda through mainstream media? Is there anything that in particular you wish to share with our listeners today?
I would say continue learning and continue caring and continue examining your own biases. Everyone's life is marked by biases, and most of them are unconscious or subconscious. And yeah, continue fighting. Palestine will probably not be liberated within our lifetime, but we all can play a tiny role, and it's our right and our duty to fight for others who are less privileged than us. I think privilege is a great factor which should inform our decisions every day. Most of us are more privileged than people in Gaza and elsewhere, and we need to help with whatever little thing we can to improve lives, even if it's just one life, even if it's just one donation, even if it's, I don't know, showing up at a protest or posting on social media or donating to an NGO, whatever we can. There's no solution. Nothing really has shown to work so far. So I don't think anyone has the solution to the Palestine problem, since Palestinian lives have only gotten worse. But we must continue fighting.
Indeed, every effort counts, and in Ecocide and in speaking on Ecocide in Palestine, ecocide and genocide are both intertwined in Palestine, and the systematic destruction of the people is bound up with the systematic destruction of their life and the support system, and the same goes to animals. And I hope this message reaches to people who are doing their best to bring justice to animals and humans in Palestine, and also that also extends to humans and non-humans who are living under occupation and colonialism in different countries across the world. I wish you the very best with your research, with your activism, with your advocacy, Rimona. And I hope to catch up on another episode to speak maybe in depth on other topics that you are also engaged in and work on. Until then, Best of luck with everything, and thank you so much for being and joining us today on the Vegans for Palestine podcast. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanking all listeners for caring.
Thank you.
يا نجمة الصبح فوق الشام علاتي يا نجمة الصبح فوق الشام علاتي الجواد أخذتي والانذال خلاتي يا نجمة الشام وين 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 علاتي الجواد أخذتي والانذال خلاتي نذرن علي نعاد أحبابي عابدي لضو المشاعر وحني العتاب يابا يا 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 العريس
Fuck Israel. I had to get that off my chest. The rage just builds up and I just have to let it out every couple of hours. What did you say? Fuck Israel.